The courtroom was silent until he moved. Richard Ramirez sat at the defense table, thin and pale, his long black hair falling over his face. The judge walked in, and everyone stood, everyone except Richard. He lifted his left hand, and the whole room gasped. A black pentagram was drawn on his palm. He turned and flashed it toward the crowd, then said in a flat, cold voice, "Hail Satan." People covered their mouths. Reporters scribbled faster. Victims' families froze where they sat. The bailiff took a step forward. The judge banged the gavel. And right then, before the sentence could be read, the room felt like it would explode. How did we get to this moment? Why was the world staring at this man, waiting to hear the words that would decide the rest of his life? The story began years earlier, when California felt trapped in a bad dream. A stranger was breaking into homes at night. The newspapers called him the Night Stalker. People in Los Angeles and around it started double-locking doors, pushing sticks into window tracks, and sleeping with the lights on. Parents checked on their kids more than once before bed. Neighbors formed watch groups and took turns walking the block with flashlights. No one felt safe. Police chased lead after lead. At first, the crime seemed random. Different towns, different ages, different kind of homes. That made it hard. But small clues began to line up. A stolen car, a shoe print, then, finally, a fingerprint from a car that had been abandoned. When they ran it, a name popped up, Richard Ramirez, a face to match the fear. Soon his photo was everywhere, on TV and papers, taped to store windows. One day, when he stepped off a bus in East LA, people recognized him from headlines. Someone pointed. Someone shouted, "That's him." A chase began. Ordinary neighbors ran after him. A man blocked his path with a truck. Others grabbed him and held on. Police sirens screamed closer. For the first time, the hunter was trapped by the people he had scared. Officers handcuffed him as a crowd watched. Some cheered. Some cried. Everyone felt the weight of it. The Night Stalker was caught. Then came the long wait for justice. The trial drew reporters from across the country. Lines formed outside the courthouse each morning. People wanted a seat inside. The judge reminded everyone this was a court of law, not a show. Still, it felt like the whole nation was watching a stage. Inside, the rules were simple. The prosecution had to prove he was guilty. The defense tried to raise doubt, point his past, and challenge the evidence. The prosecutors brought what they had: the fingerprint match, stolen items linked to victims, eyewitness stories, and careful timelines. They spoke in calm voices and asked clear questions. Detectives explained how the clues fit together. Scientists described how prints are lifted and compared. Bit by bit, a picture formed for the jury. The hardest moments came when survivors took the stand. They spoke slowly, sometimes stopping to breathe. They told the court how a normal night turned into the worst night. They explained what they heard, what they saw, and how they fought to live. The courtroom listened in heavy silence. Even the reporters wrote more quietly then. Richard sat still most of the time, staring at the table or looking out at the room. Sometimes he smiled. Sometimes his eyes looked empty, like he was far away. On some days, he made the court tense on purpose, turning to the cameras, flashing that drawn symbol again, or whispering dark phrases. Each time, the judge called for order. Each time, the jury tried to keep their minds on the facts. Weeks turned into months. Outside, people argued about the case, on radio shows, at dinner tables, in grocery store lines. Inside, the jury kept their promise: listen to the evidence and make a fair decision. When the lawyers finished their closing speeches, the jury went to a private room to talk. Hours passed, then more hours. Finally, word spread through the building. A verdict had been reached. Everyone hurried back. The benches filled. The families held hands. The judge asked the foreperson to stand. Paper rustled. Hearts pounded. The foreperson began to read. Guilty. The word hit the room like a strike of thunder. Guilty on one count, then another, then another. The list went on. Faces crumpled. Some people sobbed quietly. Others let out a long breath, like they had been holding it for years. Richard barely moved. The judge nodded and set a date for the next step. Sentencing. The whole country would wait to hear it. Would this man, who would put a city in fear, spend life in prison? Or would he face the ultimate penalty allowed by the state? The gavel fell. Court adjourned. The question hung in the air like a storm about to break. The courtroom filled again for sentencing. The judge looked straight at Richard Ramirez. The room was so quiet you could hear shoes scrape the floor. Families of victims held hands. Reporters waited with pens ready. Richard sat still, his long black hair partly covering his face. The judge spoke in a steady voice. "For these crimes, the court sentences you to death." Gasps broke out. A mother cried into a tissue. A father closed his eyes and nodded. Richard barely blinked. He leaned back in his chair, almost like he was bored, and whispered something to himself that no one could quite hear. The bailiff stepped forward. Chains clicked. The Night Stalker was led away to face the rest of his life on death row. After the words were spoken, the pace slowed. Appeals began. Papers, hearings, more papers. Lawyers filed motions. Judges reviewed records. It was a careful, slow grind of the justice system. Outside the courthouse, the crowds thinned. Cameras left. People went back to work and school. But for the families, the story did not end. They still carried the hurt. They still kept photos on mantles and quiet spaces in their homes where someone used to sit. Justice had spoken, but healing would take time. Soon, officers moved Richard to a high-security prison. Tall fences, razor wire, watchtowers. Everything built to hold dangerous men. He was taken to San Quentin State Prison, to the death row unit. Doors were heavy. Steps echoed on concrete. A guard explained the rules in a firm, calm voice. Count times, yard times, no touching other inmates. Follow every order. Richard listened, his face flat, his eyes restless. This was his new world. Small cell, metal bed, narrow window, the sound of gates buzzing open and shut. Life there was strict and slow. He had a set time to shower, a set time to exercise alone in a yard cage, a set time to eat. Some days he read. Some days he stared at the wall for a long time. He drew in notebooks. He wrote letters. He watched TV through thick glass when it was allowed. Guards learned his patterns the way guards do. Who talks, who keeps quiet, who tries to test the rules. Richard stayed mostly to himself, but he liked attention when it came. And strangely, attention did come. Letters arrived from people he had never met. Some wrote to insult him. Some wrote to ask questions. And a few wrote to praise him, which shocked many people on the outside. Reporters sometimes asked for interviews. He answered when it suited him, tossing out cold lines that made headlines. It was unsettling to see a man who had caused so much pain still pull eyes toward him, even from behind bars. For the victims' families, those stories hurt. They wondered how someone so cruel could become a strange, kind of dark celebrity. Yet the guards stuck to the rules. The warden stuck to the rules. The court stuck to the rules. The law would decide each step, not the news. Years passed. Appeals were filed and denied. New appeals were filed again. Richard grew older. His once wild hair thinned. The sharpness in his face softened a little, though his stare stayed hard. He walked the same short stretch of floor in his cell day after day, counting tiles, counting time. Then something happened that no one expected, and many could not understand. A woman who had been writing to Richard for years asked to visit him. Visits were watched closely, with thick glass in between, and phones to talk. She kept coming back. She said she believed he was more than his crimes. She said she believed in him in a way that made almost everyone else shake their heads. The visits continued. The letters grew longer. Over time, the woman asked for something bigger. She wanted to marry him. Marry a man on death row. Marry the Night Stalker. Paperwork was filed. Rules were checked. The prison set strict limits. No contact, no special treatment, and clear boundaries. But in the end, the request was approved under the law. News of it spread and shocked the public. People asked, how can this be? Why would anyone choose this? Families of victims felt the wound reopen in the prison chapel. Under watchful eyes and without a touch allowed, plans were made for a small ceremony that followed every rule to the letter. The date was chosen. The inmate and the visitor will become husband and wife through a glass divide. On the morning set for ceremony, the chapel door clicked open, and the guards took their positions. The chaplain straightened a small stack of papers. A phone buzzed. Footsteps approached down the hall. Slow, careful, heavy with keys and lock checks. Richard stepped in wearing prison blues, his face unreadable. The visitor entered from the other side, clutching a simple bouquet, her hands shaking. The room went quiet as the chaplain lifted his eyes and began to speak. The chaplain's voice carried across the small prison chapel, calm and steady. Richard Ramirez stood behind thick glass, wearing a standard blue prison uniform, his hair longer now, streaked with gray. On the other side of the glass sat the woman who had written him letters for years, her bouquet trembling in her hands. Guards watched from every corner. A phone receiver connected them, the glass barrier keeping them apart. Yet, despite the strange setting, the vowels were read. The woman spoke quietly into the phone. Richard, in his flat, steady tone, repeated the words back. The chaplain signed the papers. Just like that, the Night Stalker was married on death row. News spread quickly. Headlines appeared in major papers. Night Stalker marries behind bars. People across America shook their heads. Families of victims spoke out in disbelief and anger. To them, it felt like a cruel twist that a man responsible for so much pain could still find someone willing to call him husband. For Richard, though, it was another chance to stay in the spotlight, another way to draw eyes and whispers even from behind prison walls. Life went on in San Quentin. The prison routine never changed. Guards made rounds. Inmates counted the hours. Richard kept his cell, reading, writing, and sometimes sketching. Letters continued to arrive from people outside, some curious, some hateful, some disturbingly admiring. He answered when he felt like it, often with short, chilling notes. Journalists requested interviews, hoping for quotes that would shock their readers. Each time, he managed to remind the world he was still there. But years were passing. Appeals dragged through courts, each one denied. The long road of the justice system meant that Richard never came close to the gas chamber. His body aged, his health declined, and the man once feared as a shadow in the night became just another prisoner growing old in a small concrete cell. In his final years, the tone of the letters he received shifted. Some still came from those who saw him as a dark figure fascination, but many stopped writing at all. The world outside was changing. New crimes and new tragedies took over the headlines. For younger generations, the name Night Stalker was something they had only heard in documentaries. Inside prison, Richard's days grew quieter. Then, in June 2013, the news broke. Richard Ramirez was dead. He had not died in the gas chamber. Instead, after years of illness, he passed away at age 53 from complications linked to cancer. It was the end of a life that had begun in shadows, risen into terror, and ended in a cold, gray cell far from the streets he once haunted. When word reached the families of his victims, the reactions were mixed. Some felt relief, saying justice had finally come, even if not by the gas chamber. Others felt frustration, saying he escaped the punishment he had been given. But for all, there was a sense that a chapter had closed. The man who had once brought Los Angeles to its knees was gone, and yet his story remained. Documentaries, books, and podcasts continued to retell the terror of the Night Stalker. For those who lived through the fear of the 1980s, his name still carried a chill. He became a reminder of how fragile safety can feel, how one person can shake an entire city, and how justice, though slow, always keeps moving forward. The Night Stalker's reign of terror ended in 1985 with his capture. His trial brought him into the spotlight once again, where he mocked the system and shocked the public. His life in prison was marked by strange fame, letters from strangers, and a marriage that made headlines. And his death came quietly, far from the chaos he once created, leaving behind a story that America will never forget.